introduce our first series, and that is K.I.S.S Crafting 101. So what is K.I.S.S Crafting? It stands for Keep It Simple Stamping, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break it down and explain everything step by step with the beginner in mind. So if you're new to the hobby and you're a little overwhelmed by all of the techniques and all of the products, then this is the video series for you. Now, to begin with, each of the cards or the projects that we'll be creating are what I would consider a beginner level. And then as the series progresses, we will increase the difficulty of either the technique or the card that we're creating, so that even if you've been doing this for a while and you're a seasoned stamper, there may be something useful in these videos for you as well. Now, remember, these are all my personal tips and tricks and things that I've incorporated into my work over the years, things that work for me. If you're doing it a different way and it works for you, then keep doing it that way. You know, what works for one person doesn't always work for the other, so just take what you like and leave the rest. Okay, so here's the fun part. I'm encouraging all of you to create along with me. So at the end of each video, I will provide a tag and post your photos to either Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and then we can all share with each other what we're creating. I really hope that you like this video series and that you find something useful. If you do, don't forget to thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss any of our future videos. And if you have something that you want to make sure that we include in this series, or you have a question on one of the videos, or just anything in general, leave it in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer it in the comments. Or if it's one that we're getting a lot of or repeatedly, then I will make a video addressing that question. Oh, and also, if you would, leave in the comments how long you've been crafting. You know, I want to know how long you guys have been crafting. So that way I have a better gauge of what types of videos you guys would like to see in the future, because I plan on doing some more series. So if you have ideas or suggestions for other videos outside of this series, if you've been doing this forever and you just want to see more masking or more embossing or something like that, leave it in the comments. If you are new, I want to know it, so leave it in the comments below. I want to know how long you guys have been crafting. So now that we have all of the formal introductions out of the way, let's get started with the first video.
So let's begin by reviewing some of the basic inks. So there are a lot of different types of ink on the market, but these are the two that I use most often, with the exclusion of Versamark, which we'll talk about later. So first we're going to talk about pigment ink. Now this is a thicker, opaque formula ink, and it comes on a foam pad. Now this dries on top of the paper, so it is slower drying, but because of that, it can also be embossed. I usually use this for large solid images where even coverage is what's important. My other go-to ink is dye ink. Now this is a thinner formula ink, and it comes on a felt or linen pad. It actually soaks into the paper as it dries, and it is faster drying than pigment. However, I tend to use this more when I have detailed images or for sentiments when retaining the detail is important. So these are both really great formulas with their own advantages, and the type of ink that you're going to use on a particular project really comes down to the technique used and personal preference. Besides ink, there's another very important factor in making a great impression: the stamp.
You'll want a good high quality stamp, something made out of photopolymer. Don't be fooled by acrylic stamps. They may be cheaper in the short term, but in the long run they're going to cost you more in frustration and wasted cardstock from not getting the impressions that you want. Acrylic and silicone are meant to repel water, so especially if you're using a dye-based ink, it's going to beat up on that surface, whereas photopolymer is not. And you can tell the difference in the material, one, by feel, and two, by sound. You can tell by that sound that surface is ready to receive ink. It's going to apply nice and evenly and all over the stamp. It's not going to give you that beating that acrylic will. So I highly recommend using a photopolymer stamp like our stamps.
Now let's put these two together and make an impression. Believe it or not, the trick is all in the ink application.
The inking method is pretty much the same whether I'm using pigment or dye ink. So the main difference in a pigment and a dye ink on the pad itself is the material that it's made out of. Here you can see this is made out of a foam. It's a softer foam, so a lighter touch is key. And when you're inking up this stamp, you just want to use firm but not squishy taps. So just firm taps. Check the surface of your stamp, and you can usually see when you have full coverage. And then you're going to do a test impression, and you should come out with a gorgeous impression like so. Now, when you squish into the pad, what you're going to do is you're going to force that ink up into every crevice of this stamp, and your impression is not going to be ideal. So, and you can actually hear it. And you can see the ink seeping up around. Now, do you see how much ink is on that stamp surface? Now all of that ink is going to transfer to your paper and your impression, and you're going to end up with something like that. Now you've lost all of your detail and you can see the ink pooling up all around. So that's what you don't want to do. Do not squish and smush. Now after I've cleaned my stamp with a baby wipe, I usually just tap it off a couple times until I hear that stick come back. That's pretty much how I know my stamp is clean and dry and ready to stamp again. The pad on a dye ink is made out of felt or linen usually, and it's firmer. You can still force ink up into the crevices of the stamp that you don't want to, but you'll do the same method. The firm taps, check the surface of your stamp. It helps to move it around too, because sometimes if you use one side of your stamp pad more than the other, that side will go dry.
And this is why I always stamp on scratch paper before stamping on my project.
And see, here we've got some ink from the red mixing with the green, and we can easily fix that. Just stamp it a couple of times until you get that true green back. And you will run into this problem with any of the more pigmented colors like red or black or brown. But it's easy enough to just stamp it a couple of times until you see all of that residual ink gone and the true color coming back through. And it looks like we're about to our true color again.
So are you ready to practice? Let's put it all together with what I like to call the no-fail layout. Today's project is perfect for practicing your stamping. We're going to be doing one of my personal favorites, an all-over background stamping pattern with a strong focal point. So for this one, we're going to be using the sentiment. Since this is a one-layer card, it's really important that our sentiment not only be straight, but centered. So for that, we're going to be using the T-square ruler. I'll line up my sentiment about 2/3 of the way up my card base, and then draw a light line that I can use as a guide when stamping. We'll just erase this line once our ink is dry. Another trick for lining up your sentiment is to use your grid mat. Line it up across one of the lines on the mat and then pick it up with your acrylic block. This will make sure that the stamp itself is mounted to your block straight. And then say you were stamping it at the bottom, you could use the edge of your acrylic block and line it up against the edge of your cardstock, and this would ensure it was straight. We're going to be using Memento's Tuxedo Black ink here, and when using these dewdrops, I like to take the pad to the stamp instead of the stamp to the pad. Since it's a little surface, it's easier to do it that way. Now our sentiment is stamped nice and straight thanks to our guideline that we drew in. So for our background stamping, we're going to be using our Pretty Patches Apple stamp set. And I'm going to lay down a piece of scratch paper because we're going to be stamping this pattern off the edge on some spots. We want it to look like the pattern continues off the page, maybe like it was just cut from a piece of pattern paper. I'm going to be stamping the apples in our pigment ink and Cranberry Crush, and you'll notice that I'm stamping off to the side on my scratch paper first. I almost always do some practice stamps off to the edge. One, it helps me to make sure that I've got my ink completely covering my stamp. Two, it makes sure that I don't have any debris or lint on my stamp that will mess up my impression. Nothing worse than getting to the final stages of a card and you're putting that finishing touch or your sentiment on and you have a dirty stamp and you have to start all over. So I highly recommend doing, just a couple practice stamps off on scratch paper before you commit to your project. So I'm going to continue to randomly stamp these apples, and you'll notice that I'm changing the position and rotating the stamp as I'm stamping it. And that just helps to further give a random feeling to the pattern so that it doesn't look deliberate or, too linear. So move it around, switch up the orientation, and it'll help to give it a better flow. So I'm just going to finish up my apple pattern by stamping some coming in off the edge as well. So not only did we want to stamp some off the edge, but we want to add a few coming onto the edge as well. Now it's time to add the leaves, and for that we're going to be using a dye ink. We're going to be using Hero Arts Shadow Ink in Field Greens. And everywhere that there's an apple, we'll add a little leaf to its stem. Just like we did with the apples, we're going to add some leaves coming in off the edge, as if there was an apple just off the edge of the sheet. Now you could leave this card as is and it would look great, but there's a little heart image also included in this set that matches the pattern in the leaves, and this is a great way for us to bring in some more color to this card. So for this we're going to be using the Hero Art Shadow Ink in Butter Bar, and we're just going to add these hearts to the center of each apple. So this is a really great layout for practicing your stamping. It also always turns out clean and professional looking, works with just about any image, and is easy to mass produce. You could create half a dozen or so and use them as a gift set, or to have some on hand when you just need a quick card. We're almost done now. The only thing left is to erase that line that we created as our guide in the beginning. For that, we're going to be using a clean eraser. Make sure that it's clean and not the end of a pencil that's been used to erase and has lead all over it, because that'll ruin your card too. So just make sure you use a clean eraser to lightly erase that line, and we're done. Again, quick, easy, great way to practice your stamping, and easy to mass produce. So I really hope you enjoyed today's card. If you do, don't forget to thumbs up. And I really hope that you guys decide to play along and create your own. If you do, don't forget to post it to either Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And you can tag it with hashtag W+9. And that way we can share with each other what everyone is creating. I think it'll be a lot of fun to see everybody's variations. So thanks again for watching. I will see you in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
So that we can all see what each other is creating. What each other are creating. I think it's what each other is creating, isn't it? Let me try that again. And subscribe at the top or the bottom now. Wherever it is. Don't forget to... Hey guys, down here. Down here. Alright, last one, I swear. I think it's a lot of fun to share and encourage our creativity because it just is. That's why.